Hi, this is the Social Jello with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Jello with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of Social Jello with Angelo podcast. Have you heard of a guy named William Chow? Have you heard of something called Kaji Kempo? If you haven't heard of Kaji Kempo, go ahead and check out. You can fast forward to the end of this thing. I do a What is Kaji Kempo podcast with UFC coach John Hackelman, that's Chuck Liddell, UFC Hall of Champion Chuck Liddell's coach, and Glover Teixeira, UFC Champions coach. And he talks about his connection to Kaji Kempo. This episode is going to be about a mysterious character named William Chow. Was he the best martial artist in Hawaii? Or was he a complete fraud? I don't know. So when these kind of things happen, I bring in my resident expert, KSDI historian, Mitch Powell. Mitch Powell has been on the show before, and if you've followed the show, you can check out plenty of historical episodes. If not, this is your first one. Enjoy the show. We're going to learn about a mysterious martial artist from Hawaii named William Chow, who supposedly is behind Ed Parker Kempo and Kaji Kempo. I don't know. These are all things that I've seen on the internet and I've seen thrown around. So let's find out. So who's William Chow?
Who is William Chow, right? He's a lot of things to a lot of different people because he was either a martial arts associate, a martial arts instructor of yours, a historical figure. It really depends on where you fall, either in his lineage or Kempo. So here's some things. Born on July 3rd, 1914. Passed away at 73 years old, September 21st, 1987. His father came to Hawaii when his father was 18 years old. He came there from China. His mother was Hawaiian. William was, number 3 of 16 children. Yeah, there's a lot of children.
Oh, back then they
And,
used to like pop them out like rabbits back then.
well, I don't believe they were all the same mom. I think there was another mother and then the Hawaiian mother. I could be wrong. I'm not a William Chow expert. I'm just looking at some of the stuff I have in my notes. William Chow and his brother Frank and his younger brother, much younger brother, John Chow, they all trained from Mitose. And then they all trained in Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu with the Henry Okazaki group. So we'll kind of tie a little bit of Kaji Kempo in with Chow early on. Here's a video of Kaji Kempo founder Joseph Holt. So he was the jiu-jitsu judo guy in Kaji Kempo. And he's talking on this recording. And he said he was in class training alongside William Chow in a Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu class. And Chow said, "Hey, you want to go check out this class? There's a new karate class, and it's going to start up, and I want to go. I want to go check it out. You want to go?" And Hulk was like, I think I'm good. I'm just going to stay here and keep doing my Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu, but you go check it out. And that was 1942, and that's when James Mitose started his first school where he was teaching people. And William Chow went over there, and Tom Shung was already a student. Chow joined the class, and he stayed with Mitose through the 40s. In 1946, Chow got his black belt. And that's really where, if you want to look at the connection to Kaji Kempo, Chow has to get a black belt first, because then he starts teaching a class of his own.
And then I'm gonna stop you real quick.
Yeah.
He started with Mitose in 1942.
Yes.
And then he got his black belt in 1946.
Yes, correct.
4 years.
Well, maybe. I mean, it could be under 4 years, depending on if he started at the end of 42 and got his black in the early part of 46. It's hard to say how long it would take someone to be skilled enough at any particular time in any particular art based on their skill sets. And it's if you just look at the numbers. I did like Joe Louis, famous karate fighter Joe Louis. I think he did it in like 16 months, 18 months, or something like that overseas, right? I don't think anybody would go, oh, that guy. So it's not really a time thing. Some people can train their whole lives and they suck. So it's not really a time thing.
I'm just taking notes. I'm just taking notes. I know some people put a lot of credit into that basket. So whenever I hear those time frames, because I know a lot of Kempo guys love William Chow. So I think I just think it's interesting whenever I hear that kind of stuff. But anyway, continue. 1946, he got his black belt.
Well, I think that's for all of it. Let's just say if you're a Kempo person, you're trying to follow the flow. Mitose starts teaching, and then his students start getting rank. Where Mitose got his rank, I don't know. Maybe he got it because he was Mitose and the family taught this art down generations one after another. Maybe he got it because Okazaki was the guy on the island that was doing everything and he had rank. It's hard to say. And without doing a serious deep dive with all the different Mitose groups together, you don't want to speculate. So what you can say is Mitose started teaching and he then gave out some black belts. So William Chow was one of those. For those that have this book, and we see this book, in this book, it's Mitose's book. It was published in 1953, but it was completed in 1947. So in that book are Thomas Young and William Chow doing techniques and being the Ukian techniques. And there's Mitose's style at the time, Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, which is what he called his art back then. Those are the techniques that made up his art. Those were the techniques that Chow would have had to learn, Thomas Young would have had to learn, and so forth to be in Mitose's system and get graded. So that book's available now. It was gone for a long time, but there's now copies popping up. That's an excellent book if you're trying to figure out your lineage.
And it's just
So,
one more interesting note for any MMA jiu-jitsu guys who just happen to pop into this podcast. Kind of crazy about an art mixing in the 1950s, jiu-jitsu and kempo, and it's essentially striking and grappling in the 50s. And no connection, but on the other side of the world, you got the Gracies doing something similar around the same time frame, starting to mix grappling, striking with Vale Tudo. So just for you jiu-jitsu people who tuned in, just something, a little mental note that something similar is happening in Hawaii.
so I pointed out that book because if you look at the techniques, and there's like 85, 88 techniques for men, and then there's a series of women's techniques. And then the basic stuff too, some basic blocks and strikes and so forth. That's what Chow would have had to learn. And so in 46, he opens his first class. He's a black belt now. This book's finished in 47. He would have had to continue to know that knowledge to go to his teacher's course and help teach. So Imperato, Adriano Imperato, Chijo of the Kajikembo world, which means founder, when he got out of the military, it was 1947. It was actually March 17th of 1947. He got out of the military, went back to where he was living in Hawaii, and he had a friend of his. Let's see, where's she at? This guy right here. I don't know if you can see that. Did it black out? Yeah, unfortunately, it did. There we go. His name is Walter Wood. So Walter Wood was married to Imperato's girlfriend at the time, who later became his wife. And one day he had seen Freddie Lara and George McCumber out in their front yard striking a makawari. And they started talking. And so he took Imperato over to the house, which was just down the street from where Imperato lived, and introduced him to this makawari board. And my understanding is Imperato hit it and tore the skin off his knuckles. So he was really intrigued, and he thought, I want to figure this out. So Laura said, "Hey, do you want to come in and check out the school?" So Imperato did that, and he became a student. And it's it's important to know your timeline, because Imperato didn't do this until after he got out of the military, which was, as I said, March 17th, 1947. You'll see people say, "Oh, my grandfather or my dad trained with Imperato in 1944." No, they didn't. Imperato didn't even start until the spring of 47. So for all those articles that you read and all those documentaries, videos where you see someone trying to say they were a student prior to that, they weren't. So in fact, this was Child's first school. I don't know if you can see this. This was 1183 Fort Street, so about 2 blocks from Britannia. And this was the school where Chow taught. This was the Columbus Welfare Building. And Chow taught for the Catholic Youth Organization. So much like the Young Men's Christian Association, which we know of as the YMCA. So Chow had a school there. Imperato went over, looked at it, checked it out, and he said that he wanted to start. So it's the process that now gets us to Imperato becoming a student of Chow's. And Imperato said there were only a few students there, and they were all white belts.
And I don't know if you're gonna get this later. Where's Ed Parker in all this? Because Ed Parker was somehow connected somewhere in there, right?
Yeah, after this. So Ed Parker wasn't in that group of early white belts. He came a little bit later. So I want to read this for those people that think I'm blowing smoke. This is Imperato's memoirs. So he was trying to write a book, and it didn't get published, but it didn't mean he didn't write it. This is how Imperato met William Chow. It says, "My brother-in-law, Woody," he wasn't actually his brother-in-law yet, because Imperato hadn't married his wife, the wife yet, to make the connection. He says, "And my sister-in-law, Pauline, would come over to our house in the evening, and they would cook potluck style, and maybe all eat there with us. Then one night, he popped up the question to me, Nonoi." That was Imperato's nickname at the time, Nonoi. Said, "Nonoi, you heard of this art called Kempo?" So I tell him, "Kempo? What was that?" He said it was some kind of Okinawan Japanese self-defense. He said this guy, Freddie Lara and George Macumba, they always in the front of his house punching the board. So I was curious. So I said, oh yeah? This guy, Freddie Lara, was working as security guard for Tripler Hospital. So the next day, after they got through work, Woody came over and picked me up, and we walk over to this guy, Freddie Lara house. Over there was George Macumber. That was in 1947. So for people trying to identify a historical starting point for Imperato in his Kempo journey, I'm not making this up. This is what he wrote. So it goes on and talks about the classes, and that there were only, he says, only about 4 or 5 students, all white belts and so forth. So I wanted to use that to let people know that there are documents out there that do explain this in real terms with information you can back up, not just the talk story stuff. So Imperato starts training there. It's 47, and he has to learn what Chow is teaching, and Chow's got to be teaching what's in the book. I mean, Mitose's got a book out. Chow's a student at Mitose's. He's still teaching there, and he's teaching students who really are Mitose's grandkids, if you will. So Imperato, more than likely, along with Freddie Lara and George Macumber, it's not Macumba, it's actually George Macumber, this is what they're learning. So at some point after this, Joe Imperato starts training. So Imperato, Joe Adriano Imperato, he starts somewhere around probably Aprilish of 47. We don't know how long after. Could be months, weeks, months, 4 or 5 months, and then Joe Imperato starts. And they start training first at the school at the Columbus Welfare Building, which was 1183 4th Street. And then they moved to the Kaika Gym and they trained at the Kaika Gym. And when they did that, George McCandless was there training with them. George McCandless, William McCandless, became a student who also taught with the Imperato group. So you've got now 47, 48. By 49, Imperato's now teaching on his own. So between the 47 when Imperato started and the 49 when he goes and teaches his own school is the founding of Kaji Kempo.
Okay. And then you were saying Ed Parker came in later. So the Imperato brother was, we say brothers, but Joe came in a little later under Cijo. So Adriano came in first, and Ed Parker wasn't there for that first group. He wasn't there. He came in later. So Imperato got his black belt from Chow?
He did get his black belt. He was Chow's very first student to obtain a black belt. That information is really cool. This book right here. It's karate and its development in Hawaii to 1959. And it's by Bruce Haynes. He was writing a thesis for the University of Hawaii on martial arts in Hawaii. And he was also a student of William Chow. So we interviewed Chow while he was a student there. And he also interviewed Chow after he had stopped training there. And Chow gave him a list of the black belts that Chow promoted. And Imperato was the first one. And he gets, all of them are identified. Go to the Chow black belts here.
What's up? Real quick, this episode is brought to you by thepit.tv. If you want to train with a UFC coach, why not train with the best? Chuck Liddell's coach has an online program where you can work through his entire system, learn all his secrets about how to train and how, at the end of it, how to teach people to get into the UFC, to do MMA properly. Hit up thepit.tv for more information.
The Chow students, the Chow graduates, as it's called, Paul Yamaguchi, Masaichi Oshiro, Ed Parker, and Adriano Imperato. Those were the black belts that he had issued out prior to 1959.
Okay. So even though in our timeline that we have, because of documents that you have from Cijo, so you know that in our paperwork here, we know that Adriano Imperato, the founder of Kaji Kempo, started before Ed Parker. In the other book, it's kind of just listed as black belts that got their black belt before 1950s.
Well, no, this book explains who the graduates are and what they did. Like it's got Imperato here. Mr. Adriano Imperato was a Shodan graduate, William Chow. In 1959, now he's doing this interview, right? In 1959, he was the karate instructor at the Palama Settlement, where he had taught this art since May of 1952. Classes at Palama have been large, usually averaging about 20 pupils. So back then, 20 students was considered a large class. So he has a little bit of something. Mr. Ed Parker graduated with a Shodan from William Chow's class in 1953, so 4 years after Imperato, along with Paul Pung. And he is one of the pioneer karate instructors to open a class on the mainland. In 1959, Parker was teaching karate in Pasadena, California. So there's good information about all the different graduates, and it also has Mitose's graduates in there too.
And then for those of martial artists that stuck around this long from other arts, a lot can be said about Ed Parker. But one thing that I can say, and I've mentioned this in other interviews in the past, is Ed Parker is an important figure in martial arts. Not so much we can have a long debate on whether it's effective or not effective, or whether you like or hate Kempo. But at that point in time, that was the platform. His Long Beach tournament, the Ed Parker tournament that he developed, gave the platform for every martial arts even Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. People don't know that, but even Gracie Jiu-Jitsu got its startup because of this, because of that tournament brought in martial artists from all over the world. And it was that seminar circuit that the Gracies tapped into later to spread their art. It was one of many. Gracies tapped into a lot of stuff. But before UFC, before all that stuff, it was actually Ed Parker's platform. Bruce Lee. A lot of people know and say what you want about Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee also tapped into that. And again, I've had a lot of other interviews. You can check out my channel. We talk about Bruce Lee, whether it's a Hollywood or not Hollywood art. But at the end of the day, these platforms is what I'm really interested in, because right now we have YouTube. Back then they did not. The internet is relatively new, maybe not to you, but for historically speaking, the internet itself is a relatively new concept. So if you wanted to spread your martial art, there was no way to do it globally unless you got out there and boots to the ground started working the streets. And not to say streets like they were punching each other in the street. I'm saying you actually had to go door to door, flyers, have your own networks. These networks are what created the networks you now see on the internet. So like this predates the internet, and Ed Parker is kind of the driving force behind that. Whether you like him, whether you like Kempo or not, I guess that's a completely different sidetrack. But more people, Chuck Norris, also Ed Parker. Chuck Norris, whether or not you agree with his styles or what he does, Chuck Norris was connected to the same tournament circuit, that same circuit that started all those early days of kickboxing, 1980s, tied to the same circuit. Eventually it branched off and became kickboxing, but kickboxing in America didn't really exist till the 80s. This whole concept, more people like Benny the Jet Rodriguez, this is all tied to these old school guys that helped create the UFC in a way, because it was these same martial artists that later generations down the line started competing in what you see now today. And a lot of these people, their students are now coaches, and this little historical, if you keep following the history, it's all connected to these people. And it's really interesting how it all kind of goes back to Hawaii, which is which is really interesting to me, like how you have that connection from Hawaii to Brazil and how it all connects up in it's a very American story, which apple pie and luau's. It's a very American story.
Well, there's an interesting connection here between Imperato and Ed Parker that, I mean, people that know, but William Chow dropped out of school when he was probably in about the fourth or fifth grade. So his reading and writing comprehension was not very good. And there's a video out there where Imperato talks about he would have to read the letters for Chow, and he'd tell him who's trying to get promoted from him. And at one point, when Ed Parker left, he was not a black belt. So he's in LA. He wants to do the school. I think he went to Utah first, because I believe he was in college at Brigham Young. But he ends up out in LA, and he needs a black belt really to stand out when he teaches and so forth. So he had written a letter to Chow trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this? And from what Imperato said, initially Chow said, I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. He was mad at him, right? Got mad at him. And Imperato said, he's your guy. He's trained with you for all these years. He's got an opportunity here. Because I really think, it would be good for everybody if you did that and you promoted him. So according to Imperato, and it's on this video, he talks about all of this. And so Chow goes ahead and does it. So Chow ends up not knowing, but he's really the catalyst. Had he not given Parker that belt, who knows what would have happened. And from there, not only did the Kempo folks and the karate guys like Chuck Norris and Bob Wall and Joe Lewis, all those guys go to the internationals, which was Parker's tournament, and fight there. But all the Kaji Kempo people went there too. Tony Ramos' group, Aleo Reyes's group, all the folks that were associated, Gaylord's group that were associated with Kaji Kempo, they were there. They all were friends with Ed Parker, and they became friends with Bruce Lee. But if you're talking about competitions, Al DeCoscos, Malia DeCoscos, Bernal, Eric Lee. It doesn't get any bigger than that. Phil Corning. These are the guys that were winning everything, all part of the Ed Parker connection. So our ties go deep. And I'm going to say this, and some of the Parker guys are probably not going to be happy about this. But if you look at some of Ed Parker's promotional certificates, you'll notice that they came from Adriano Imperato, his higher up ones, his advanced ranks. They didn't come from Chow. They actually came from Imperato. So the friendship and the brotherhood that those guys maintained throughout their life, it was rock solid.
So what Mitch is trying to tell you, Kempo guys, is you owe us a thank you. Just kidding. Nothing like stirring the hornet's nest. Don't worry. We're so far into the podcast. If they didn't like what we had to say, they already left. They didn't hear that anyway.
Yeah. It's difficult when you want, everything to be this perfect thing, and it's not, man. Kempo's got a lot of rough edges, man, and Kaji Kempo's got more.
Yeah, they do. So, I think we're getting close to our wrap up. Was there any pertinent information you wanted to put out there?
I would say this for the people that are trying to figure out, well, what does all of this mean? James Mitose, he taught a martial art. And although this book that I have here, which a lot of people have, shows the techniques inside, how to do all the different stuff, Mitose did not limit his martial art to this. This is an example of what he taught, not what he taught. But Chow would have had to learn that. And so Chow went from there and he created his own version of Kempo. He changed the name multiple times. I have a list of all of Chow's stuff, where he changed it to Kara Fu. In April 28 of 1956, he actually called his martial art Kara Fu, Foo. So karate and gung fu combined, right? So for all the Kara Ho folks, no, before the Ho was a Fu.
They really needed to workshop that longer.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on there like that, but look at what William Chow had to know. He knew the Mitose stuff. His brother, John Chow Hoon, was a Danzaru black belt in 1945. So John Chow Hoon got a black belt before William Chow did. And William Chow's brother, Frank, family members, they all trained Mitose and they trained Danzaru and stuff. So in the case of John Chow Hoon and William, they lived in the same house. There's stories about how they took the furniture out and they basically trained in the front room. So if there was something that William Chow needed to know about Danzaru Jiu-Jitsu, he had the best sorts of information right there with him, his brother, right? So the things that William Chow would have known would have been the influences around him. And like Mitose was a very close friend of Sig Kufarov, who was a professor in Danzaru Jiu-Jitsu. So these guys all were friends. So there's a certain amount of knowledge that they would have acquired from each other just being in certain grooves. And Imperato did a very similar thing when he worked with Hulk and Frank Ordonez, Peter Chu, George Chang. When they worked together that 2-year period of time, they had different martial arts knowledge. Some had some grappling knowledge, some had some boxing knowledge, some Kempo knowledge. And they put it together and they came up with techniques. They didn't create any forms or anything like that, but they came up with techniques, and those techniques later on became the foundation for Kachi Kempo. So whenever you look at whether it's Mitose, Chow, or Imperato, be it Joe Imperato or Adriano Imperato, what was the influence around them? Boxing, check. Karate, check. Jiu-jitsu, judo, check. So those are the influences around him, and that's what they would have taught to their students. And when you look at the students that came out of Hawaii that were Imperato students, or the ones that stayed in Hawaii and didn't leave the island, they would have learned the information that was required at that particular time. But it's not like chiseled in stone. So I'm tying this up with an Ed Parker reference. There's people that don't like Ed Parker because he began doing more of the Kung Fu-like movements. He was no longer the hardline Kempo guy. Emperado did exactly the same thing. And even William Chow tries to tell people that his father was a Shaolin monk and taught him Kung Fu, right? I just think if you train long enough and you're influenced long enough by enough people, this becomes this, and that becomes this, and that's a law, and that becomes a takedown. You see it because it becomes more familiar to you. So not all of the art is going to stay one way only. As people start working with it, they start seeing stuff, and it evolves just like we evolve. So the Kempo that we do nowadays is probably similar to what they did back in those days, but it's more likely different because we are different now. Fighting is different now, and the conditioning is different now, and all of that. So, I just think if you're looking at wanting to know how to find the exact perfect, what they did book or video, or it's not there. It's not there because that stuff it changed and evolved. So
And
that's
then,
where I'm at with this.
and then my final note I'm going to say to anybody, if you kept up with this long, and right now I have a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys and grapplers that follow my channel, and if you actually kept up with this conversation, and thank you. It probably took a lot of patience on your end because this has nothing to do with what you do. Well, sort of, kind of, and yes. Back then, saying you were connected to Kung Fu in China, even though now, because of YouTube, it's really been debunked on how effective Kung Fu is. Back then, Kung Fu was your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Back then. And in a world where there is no internet to verify anything, the Kung Fu guys looked pretty badass. And Bruce Lee was a big advocate and a big push for that in society back then. So saying you did Kung Fu, I know now, but I'm just going to say it out. If you say that now on the internet, they'll laugh at you. But back then, it was like someone saying, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I'm connected to the Gracies. Being able to say you were connected, even though I laugh at the fact that William Chow, that's why I was laughing, William Chow is connected to a Shaolin monk, back then would be equivalent to saying, my father trained with Helio Gracie. It'd be the same kind of
Right.
statement. And I know it's hard for the newer generation or someone from what's happening right now to wrap their head around that. And a lot of them want to be like, well, then it's all bullshito, which is what's being thrown around the internet quite a bit lately. And what I want to say is all of you are living in the luxury of being able to verify all your information. That's all I got to say is it's a luxury. What you have going on right now with the internet, it's a luxury to be able to actually verify who comes where it goes what, have it video documented so you can actually see what's happening and you can actually tell if it's effective or not. But what I can say is when you look at the history, what I do think is interesting is all of this history is what created what you see happening right now. So you can have the debate on whether you think it's effective or not effective all you want. That history created what you see happening right now. If Bruce Lee would have never gotten the platform that he got to spread martial arts around the world, so many less people would have done martial arts and had less platforms to spread their martial arts. So it's kind of, at this point, it's hard to separate it because it's not like everything happened in a vacuum and we can't create history in a vacuum. And now we can't separate the two. So I can't say who's to say in a different universe. And if you look at meta theory and string theory, who's to say there's some universe out there where the Gracies made it without Bruce Lee, but we do live in this universe, and in this universe, thanks to that platform, the Gracies made it. So there you go. What do you think? Do you think that was a long babble? Does that make sense to you? Put it in the YouTube comments. Do you think there's some sort of connection? Do you think that these old martial arts that some people are calling bullshido gave a platform to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu? Do you think that helps somehow? I want to see your comments. What are your views? What do you think? Put it in there. I also want to thank Mitch Powell for coming out and always breaking down the history with documentation in a clear fashion. That's always appreciated. I think we should do another one covering Mitose, and maybe even another one covering what is Kempo. But that's all the time we have for today. So we'll catch you all next time. Thanks for checking out Social Jello with Angelo. Share, like, and subscribe with your friends, and we'll catch you all next time.
All right. Take care.